Welcome back to the Sprinklr Coffee Club. I'm so excited that you are joining us today. Here at the Sprinklr Coffee Club, we talk about technology. We talk about customer experience. We talk about digital transformation. We talk about what it all means for the world we live in and how to do it well with some of the world's most inspiring and well-informed experts. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to take a sip of coffee. So glad we called the show the Sprinklr Coffee Club. Today, I am really excited to introduce our guest. Our guest is a gentleman that I discovered on the internet who consistently showed up in some of the most provocative and inspiring conversations on Twitter in particular that I found myself in with enterprise thinkers and innovators from around the world. And I said, this looks like somebody that I really want to get to know. And so I feel really fortunate to have this opportunity today to follow up on some previous conversations with the incredible Bruce McTague. Bruce, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Marshall. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while.
Likewise, Bruce. So folks, Bruce is a consultant to companies around the world on a wide variety of different topics, from organizational transformation to digital transformation, and brings some of the best thoughts from the business world and history to bear on contemporary challenges. I've really enjoyed some of our early conversations, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation in public today. Bruce, how would you characterize the work that you've been doing these days?
A lot of problem solving. It's it's a crazy time. Everybody always asks me what's the number one thing that the pandemic has done, and I said it's basically amplified everything. If you've had a vulnerability, it's amplified it. If you've had a strength, it's amplified that. If you've had a flaw in your system, your supply chain, or if you had a flaw in your user experience, everything has just been amplified. So I think a lot of people have been trying to figure out, or they've been reaching out to me in particular to say, how can we deal with this type of situation? By the way, we're talking about business. I think that falls into life also, just in general.
I have experienced that as well. What would you say, Bruce, is one of the strengths that you have had that has been amplified by this current experience?
Well, I think my background has always, I started in an advertising agency in account management. So very, very early on, I just moved inside companies to figure out what made them tick. And account management was always about, it didn't matter what made them tick. It could be people, it could be products, it could be services, it could be experience, it could be engagement. It didn't, how they charged, how they earned their value. So I think at this moment, because everything has been so amplified and not one particular thing. So in a complex world, when things get amplified, it's almost like playing whack-a-mole. You're never really quite sure. You can smack something and you're never really sure what else is going to pop up. So when you have a little bit of a generalist background, and you've kind of rummaged around the inside of pretty much every company and every industry in the world, then people come and call it because they're like, I'm not really sure exactly what the problem is or what the opportunity is. So I want to reach out to somebody who's rummaged around in a lot of different businesses so you can tell me what to rummage around in.
Yes, yeah. That's remarkable. I was participating yesterday in a virtual conference from Mark Schaefer, who's an author and marketing leader. He's got a great conference called The Uprising. And we were talking about the compounding crisis of crises all going on these days. And one of the participants said, that describes my life perfectly right now. It's about dealing with one crisis, then pivoting to the next. And just the ability to do that pivot as things come fast and furious feels really important these days.
It is, but I'd have to tell you, the thing I talk a lot about is compounding errors. So instead of just compounding crises where people kind of then start jumping around in a hopscotch fashion, which is just a horrible version of multitasking. What I find is a bigger issue is compounding errors. So because everything gets amplified, errors start cascading, and anything that cascades is a difficult to stop. So the sooner you can find its source to try to figure out a way of nipping it in the bud, in anything you do. I mean, in terms of if it comes to digital, if it comes to customer problems, if it comes to employee satisfaction, any of those sorts of things. Compounding errors to me are kind of, I spend a lot of time talking about compounding errors because a lot of times you don't recognize it until actually somebody points it out to you. And they go, no, no, no. You look at a business and say, you're looking at a response. Let's talk about what the original stimulus is. What was the original sin? How about that? That might be the best way of saying it.
What's the hardest part of that? Is it discovering that you're in a compounding error situation, or figuring out
No,
how to solve it?
no, I think it actually, I think most people feel it, but it's just you don't want to. Most businesses just don't have the time or the energy, or maybe they just don't know how to do it. Is to dig down below the superficial surface, or maybe they dig down to the second layer or the third layer. But most businesses look at a compounding error or any type of error as a Gordian knot, and it's not. It's actually just sort of a tangled ball of string that just needs to be unraveled. And I think that's probably part of the reason why I get contacted. And I think there are a lot of people like me. I don't think I'm special or an expert or anything along those lines. I think anybody who has any kind of knack for being able to unravel in a certain way, I think we have a little bit more value in this particular time than other times. We always have value, but I think in this particular situation, I think it's even more so because things compound faster now at this particular time. So
Hmm. So
I
many
don't know if that
organ
makes sense or not.
It does. Oh, it really does make sense. And it makes me think about the way that I think many organizations respond to that kind of situation by hardening their resolve and saying they're going to come up with a strategy and drive towards it, stick to it. You have written about a different vision of things, though, around what you call emergent organizations, where you said in an emergent organization, instead of saying we're going to come up with a strategy and stick to it, instead, we're going to come up with a direction and test toward it. Can you tell us a little bit about that distinction and why that feels important?
Yeah, I think that at the core of that idea is uncertainty versus certainty. So I think all organizations just are begging for some certainty in some form or fashion. And they'll either attach it to a vision, a plan, or a strategy. Those are kind of the three most common things where people kind of lay them out in terms of a milestone we need to achieve, a path that we all need to walk down. And it implies that everybody is going to go tramping along in a specific direction. But then but that's not the real world. The real world is that assumes that there's a stagnant world out there instead of a contextual world. I mean, the reality would be is everybody else is trying to win at exactly the same time you are. And I always compare it to kind of marbles on a table. And you're trying to figure out a way of making sure that your marbles are moving in the direction that you want them to move into, but everybody else is trying to shake the table at exactly the same time. So I always try to, and I do. One of the best books that I think I've ever read on this was How to Lead a Quest by Dr. Jason Fox, who's probably, I would say, he's influenced my thinking just in terms of this significantly. Just a genuinely great thinker when it comes to this. But it's more along the lines of a quest. It's like we're going to go on a quest. We don't have a specific map, but we understand that we can see the geography. So sometimes, we're going to try to figure out a way of going on our quest. And you don't go to a specific spot. And a lot of times businesses chafe on that because they want to know exactly where they're going to go. They want to know that there's a flag at the top of the hill. We're all going to climb the hill and we're going to go ahead and we're going to win the flag. Well, part of the issue with that is what do you do when you get to the top of the hill? I mean, do you find another hill to go towards? What is it that you want to be able to do? So I think that there's a small company that I work with, and he laughs all the time because the very, very first meeting, he was an entrepreneur and it's a startup. And I drew up on a whiteboard, I said, you need a rolling roadmap. And everybody in the room looked at me like I was like freaking nuts. And I'm like, no. You just trust me on this. You're a startup. You feel like you need to get from here to there. And that's fine, but it's all going to change. Startup world is all about how do I meet a dynamic contextual change on a consistent basis. So I said, well, let's have a rolling roadmap. And every week you look and see where you are on your roadmap. And you know what? Maybe you change a little bit of direction. Maybe you decide you're going to make a left-hand turn when you decide you want to when you thought you were going to make a right-hand turn. But I think there's. But anyway, I want to circle back to the beginning. It's uncertainty versus certainty. I mean, at the core of any kind of emergent discussion is the discomfort with uncertainty and a comfort with certainty. All companies want to have a 5-year plan. I know no business leader who I sit down with who says, I have a vision, I want to have a plan that gets to it. That's certainty. It's also a recipe for failure. And I've had that argument with people in the past where they said, well, no, it gives us focus. It gives everybody clarity. I'm like, well, it does if you're focused on measurements solely, but the reality would be is you're at the mercy of people. And the reality would be is people's strengths are not necessarily running in a straight line at the fastest speed they can, and not everybody can run the same speed. So why would you not go ahead and just try to figure out a way of maximizing the potential of everybody in your organization, which creates unevenness, not evenness. It doesn't necessarily create a steady path towards a 5-year plan. So if you accept the fact you're going to maximize your people, you have to accept unevenness.
Now,
Anyway,
Bruce, I didn't
I
mention,
threw a
but
lot out there.
it's fantastic. And we've just got to talk about this idea of maximizing the potential of people in your organization. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Well, it depends. Do you want to start talking about digital transformation now or not? Because if you do, it flows directly into that conversation in my mind.
Yes.
Because there are a number of companies that come to me and they want to talk to me about digital transformation because I don't like talking about it the way normal people do. I guess that makes me abnormal because I don't want to talk about digital transformation. I think it's the wrong objective. I think what you're doing is you're talking about how do I maximize individuals in the organization. And I use digital to do that. If people approach a digital transformation from a digital transformation standpoint, then what they do is they say, you know what, I'm going to build the best infrastructure I possibly can. And then I'm going to have people work in that infrastructure. Well, most companies exist. Let's just say that you have an existing company. So I'm going to take a whole bunch of potentially square pegs and ask them to work in round holes. Instead of turning around and saying, I have a mixture of square pegs, triangles, round people. I have a mixture of those people. So how do I develop a digital transformation or digital infrastructure? That's kind of what a digital transformation really is trying to develop a digital infrastructure to be able to have everybody work. How do I maximize the people instead of how do I maximize the business? And I do have a lot of debates with people on that because they go, well, no, I want to maximize the business. And I go, sure you do, but you want to do it through the people who work there. It's not going to be through the digital infrastructure, because the digital infrastructure, frankly, is nothing without people. I mean, digital, all technology is nothing without people. Uh, People generate content, people generate data. If you took the people away, we would have technology sitting there doing nothing. I mean, unless you fed it something. So I take the same kind of construct when you talk to businesses about infrastructure or organizational design or any of those sorts of things. Everything begins and ends with a person. Everything does. I don't know. I mean, I work with an additive manufacturer, and they would say, well, machine learning working off of machines. And I'm like, yeah, but people write the software. There has to be some user need that kind of falls into it to be able to even create it. Nothing has ever been created without people. So.
And no company would, hopefully, in this day and age, or we're moving away from a time perhaps where we would throw a product over the wall out into the market, irrespective of the needs of our external customers. And so too, why we create our internal infrastructure without really centering the needs and experiences of our internal customers, of our humans and our team, is a
Well,
mystery.
you would think that. Well, you would think that, but so, I mean, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but the last time I looked at why startups fail, always in the top two is the product does not meet a need. I, and it blows my mind. It absolutely blows my mind that it is always in the top two. I've probably worked just peripherally, probably in a dozen startup incubators, just because I love talking to entrepreneurs, and they drive me crazy. My head explodes because the main reason would be is they believe they almost 90% of them believe that they have the greatest idea since sliced bread. And the reality is they just have found an idea or a product or a service that they love and they believe that people need. But there's a significant difference between want and need. And so people may go, wow, that sounds great, but I don't really need it. Well, don't you want it? Well, I don't know. You'd have to convince me to want it. As soon as you fall into that trap, you're that's the reason why it's in the top two or three of why
For
startups
sure.
fail.
For sure. What is the difference between the startup world and perhaps the enterprise, publicly traded scale with regard to certainty and uncertainty?
That's easy. That's idealism versus pragmatism. Period. I don't. Every time I go into a startup incubator, I probably get to tap into my idealistic, viewpoint of the world, which I love. I'm probably a pragmatic idealist myself. Um, but you lose that idealism when you get into a larger company or any kind of company that has. I would say the majority of companies, they either have any kind of gravitas or heritage. One of the two of this. They lose their idealism, so, which I think is a shame.
I do too. And in those cases, when predictability and certainty are so valued, what sort of advice do you offer to companies that are large and are optimized for delivering consistent results for market validation?
Yeah, that's actually an easy one, and it's an easy conversation to have. It probably takes a little bit more time to figure out a way of getting some traction with it, but that's progress. It's well, let's see. Let me try to get rid of that for you. So I didn't know if it popped up. So I spend a lot of time talking about progress versus milestones and objectives. So if you can talk to a company that the best way in today's world, especially if you're if you're interested in being emergent in any way, and most people kind of are, they're a little scared of it, when it comes to along those lines. But then you can kind of throw in adaptability, which is always an easy one. I can't think of a single business who says, well, I'd love to be a little bit more adaptable. Yeah. So you do that and you start talking, well, how do you do that? Well, you shift from having specific objectives and milestones and things like that. And you talk about progress. And then they ask, well, what do you mean by progress? Well, progress is pretty easy if you look at it as better today than I was yesterday, better tomorrow than I am today, period. And literally, you can look at people and go, well, why can't you measure yourself that way? Instead of trying to figure out a way of having sprints or any of those sorts of things, is why can't you constantly be looking at your people, which I can't think of from an individual meaning standpoint, how anything more powerful than for you or I to go home at night and felt like I did something a little bit better today than I did yesterday. And if me as a company allows you to be able to do that, then you as a person are actually going to feel meaningful. You will. I mean, that's a good thing. It's an intrinsic kind of energy that comes along with it. But businesses are the same way. I mean, I can't tell you how many CEOs that I have looked at and said, I know that you have quarterly goals. I know that your shareholders are beating the crap out of you. I know all those sorts of things. But can you envision standing up at your shareholder meeting going, you know what? Our goal was to be a little bit better today than we were the day before. And let me tell you my report for the 365 days of how we did. And you look at them and go, you know what? This year, 300 of the days, I feel relatively confident we were. I got to tell you, it's a pretty positive message to be able to tell people. And it's a different way of looking at objectives. So instead of me saying that we're going to be the best that we can be every day, we're going to give it 110%, which is impossible, by the way. You can only give 100%. But if you look at people and say, let's just talk about progress from that kind of standpoint, it's a pretty powerful thing. And I'll finish this point and let you can say something, but CEOs, because I deal a lot at the C level, they see a pathway. Instead of me trying to convince them that quarterly, reporting is bad or short-termism versus long-termism. I avoid those sorts of things, at least on this topic. And I talk about progress. And at the C level, they see the path all of a sudden. And if you're trying to create a better business world, that's the gig. It isn't to get them to do something. It's actually just to get them to see the path because they'll figure it out. I mean, I can't. I mean, there's some dumb shits at the C level, but the majority of people who get to that point, they kind of get it. I mean, they understand. They understand what it takes to run a business. So, anyway.
Fantastic. Oh, I love it. One of the other topics that you write about is the black box, the complex, perhaps super complex process that gets results but isn't fully explainable, especially to the mortal human mind. I think that we share an understanding that those are proliferating quickly all around the world. And you argue, if I am understanding correctly, that it is those of us who are most comfortable and capable of working with black boxes that will have a real advantage in the workplace of the future.
Yeah, I would actually split that up. I would say businesses that feel most comfortable and individuals who feel most comfortable working in that kind of environment. And you know that I sort of bucket all that into conceptual thinking. The easier way to talk about it is framing. I mean, I think the skill of being able to frame things is invaluable. In today's world, it is. I mean, black boxes are not. I mean, 90% of us, 95%, 99% of us watch a TV and couldn't take it apart. I mean, it shows up on the screen. We scream at it when all of a sudden it doesn't show up, but we couldn't fix it. But then technology has amplified that. I mean, because it was significantly different when I was using it for entertainment. Now I have a smartphone. And there are a shitload of people who can open up a smartphone and they can figure out how to change a chip. I can't. I mean, I'm dead in the water when it comes to those sorts of things. But I can frame how it works. I can frame how software works. I can frame user experience. That doesn't mean I know how to code. I mean, I couldn't code anything. I look at a wireframe and I'm like, boy, am I glad somebody knows how to be able to do those sorts of things. But I talked to a lot of software people. HumiCloud probably did one of the best illustrations I've ever seen with software. And he has software in the middle, and he said, software is the thing between the things. And I show this to software people all the time because they're like, why would we listen to you? And I go, because you're the thing between the things, and I understand the things. I understand what you connect with. I know the things on this side. I know the things on this side. That's why you want to be able to talk to me about those sorts of things. And I think that that's software engineers, user experience designers. I mean, I love listening to those people because they love the craft. They love the ones and zeros and how things work and all those sorts of things. But the majority of them can't explain it to people. And that scares the shit out of people. I mean, the 90% of the world out there has no clue how these things work. And all they do is they see headlines saying that Armageddon is upon us because technology is going to either take away their job or kill them in some way or kill their thinking or feed them fake news or whatever the heck it is. And it's this dystopian world of technology. And technology is not inherently dystopian. I mean, technology is actually a great thing. Grady Booch, who I don't know if you've ever had an opportunity to watch his TED Talk, and he said we shouldn't fear artificial intelligence because humans will make it good or bad. And you either trust in humans or you don't trust in humans to do this. And I think it falls into the same thing, circling back to black boxes. I think that nobody will ever, well, that's not true. The majority of people don't have time to understand black boxes. And we don't want them to understand black boxes. We don't want them to waste their time understanding black boxes. But that doesn't mean that we don't want them literate to be how they work or what they're about, or how they can be used for good or how they can be used for bad. And that's where I think that conceptual thinkers, conceptual framers, people who know how to be able to frame things in a way so that the 90% of the world can grasp it well enough that they can use it properly. Because that's kind of the linkage right there. Because I think, and you and I do share an interest with regard to how business, or we can make a better world. How business can either impact society in a positive way or things like that. Am I allowed to digress for a second?
Please.
So, I think that sometimes engagement is probably the easiest way for me to be able to talk about how business can be better to society. So, we talk about how the lack of business and lack of engagement in the workplace. There's like some absurdly low number. 18% of people say they're engaged in the workplace. So most organizational behavior people talk about, so how can we make people more engaged? Instead of kind of talking about what is the impact, not to the business, but to society. So that means, say first, I'll just use 20%. So that means 80% of the people go home and bitch. They bitch in front of their kids. They bitch in front of their significant other. They talk about how dysfunctional things are at work. And that bleeds out into society. They also talk about lack of integrity at work. They talk about corruption at work. They talk about the Peter principle at work. And what do? They talk about it at home. And all of a sudden they start going, well, things aren't really that fair. So maybe I'm going to encourage my kid to kind of bend the rules a little bit when he's playing football this weekend. Or, maybe I don't like that my high school coach is talking to my girls softball team about, winning isn't everything. Because you know what? It's a zero-sum world. And that's what they're learning at work, and it bleeds in. Let me take it into software. So, and I talk to software people about engagement. So a lot of times we talk about engagement as being simple, simplicity, or um, simplicity is the easiest way to do it. So, they're like, well, no, no, no. We want it to be a simple, elegant design. So everything is as simple as it can possibly be. And my pushback on that is so then you're basically telling people to be dumber. So you're teaching people every single time they use something that they should judge everything on simplicity. So it's the superficial surface of getting from point A to point B. There's no cognitive load. There's none. There's zilch out of it. So basically, I'm teaching people to be dumber. So the pushback I get on that would be, so what do you want me to do? No, you purposefully engage people. You purposefully go ahead and try to figure out a way of create some dissonance. It doesn't have to be bad. There was an article a long time ago, it might have been in Inc., where I think some software engineer said, you purposefully design something wrong because then it creates some engagement, but you've done it on purpose. So you actually know how to be able to deal with it, and you kind of show people. But that's engagement. And then the pushback I get on that would be, is you're making people work. And I go, well, maybe, but you're also making them smarter. And if you're actually selling something, don't you actually want a smarter consumer? Because don't you believe that the smarter consumer will buy your product versus somebody else? Dumbing it down to the lowest possible level you can, which is basically the commoditization of cognitive, you drive it up and you go, no, let's make people work a little bit, just a little bit, not a lot. It's not like I want them to have to strain on, every single minute, but you make people smarter. That benefits society. The more I get people cognitively engaged, the more I get people to think about what goes on inside a black box, the more I get people to think about choice making or sense making. How do I make sense of the world? How do I get people to just think a little bit more about that? How do I get people to think a little bit more about the choices? I have a better society. Anyway.
Oh, I love it. That's fantastic. And what an iconoclastic way to look at user and customer experience. It makes me think a little bit about the work of Kathy Sierra, and I'm writing about learning from games in software to help make smarter users and help them become the heroes of their own surroundings.
They do. So there's an interesting thing too, and I'm not a big gamification person, and I think it can get warped into some really, really bad spots. But when I do get pushed, I actually push people away from like Game of War, and I go to children's games because the gamification in children's and critical thinking, how do I figure out a way of getting a young person to not get frustrated enough, but to be cognitively engaged, to be able to make the next level, to be able to learn arithmetic, English, science, any of those sorts of things. There's so much to be learned from how games are developed in younger kids than I believe there are in like what I would say the Theo Priestley world of games, which he's absolutely brilliant when it comes to those sorts of things. But I just think there's so much to be learned from an engagement standpoint when you start going to a younger level from games.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Bruce, can I ask you to conclude with an explanation of this is a big topic, as is everything that we've been talking about. But I don't want to leave this conversation without asking you to revisit the power of framing. And I'm coming back to that and thinking about the learning process as a part of the experience. What do you mean by that? What does it mean to frame things effectively and powerfully?
Well, context is always the most important thing. So facts and truths are contextual to the situation and what it is. So I always, there are a couple of different tricks that I use. I mean, everybody, of course, should pick up anything that Lakoff has written about metaphors and how to be able to use metaphors. There's a book right beside my computer right now. It's called The Symbolic Species, which is all about how to be able to use narratives to be able to help frame things for people. But there are a couple of different ways. The simplest way to do is to box in. So I always either draw a square with four corners on it, and say box in whatever it is that you want to be able to articulate. And it's a simple way, or triangulation is another one. I've always told everybody that, and I've learned this probably early in my career, in account management, you learn a lot of different things about selling ideas or selling intangible thoughts and things like that. So if all you do is offer one fact or one foundational point, the reality would be is you just put one dot in the middle of a big white space. It's not anchored to anything. If you use two foundational points or principles, it's a little bit more solid, but it can be tipped over on its side, it can be knocked over, or somebody could cut it in the middle. But if I use a triangle or if I use a square to be able to contextually frame or box in the thought, it's if there was anybody, if I was ever going to debate anybody, politicians, if there was any particular politician who I loathed and I wanted to be able to debate with them, I would box them in. I would frame whatever their point of view would be, and I would suffocate it in. The other way to be able to do it is either any kind of narrative. I mean, I think storytelling has been bastardized to a point where it's kind of meaningless. But the reality would be in the very, very beginning, stories were a great way to frame ideas and thoughts. It's kind of been warped into a variety of different things. And I probably have a great debate with Mark Schaefer on that. But narratives frame, metaphors frame, stories can frame. And then if you want to go to a very, very pragmatic level, you just literally box in a thought and you offer it up that way. But I think people who can do those sorts of things, and it's a skill. It's not just in art. It's if you ever get to hear Rory Sutherland speak, he's probably, I love listening to Rory talk. I could listen to Rory talk for hours and hours and hours. He's probably one of the best framers I think I've ever heard in my entire life. And he does it in this sort of um, floral literature type of way, where everything kind of is so, it's expansive in terms of adjectives, and yet you have this clarity of thought right in the center of it, where you kind of feel like, wow, not only is it so descriptive that I can visualize it, but if somebody were to come to me at the very, very end and say, what was the takeaway? I got the takeaway. And that's a skill. It's a beautiful skill.
Oh, it's fantastic. Good. Bruce, I'm so glad that I was able to chase you down on Twitter and get to come and run parallel with your mind here for a little bit and record it and share it with our community of folks. It's really inspiring. Is Twitter the best way for folks who are watching this to tap into your thinking on the day to day? Or are there other ways that are good to
Yeah,
learn about your work?
Twitter Twitter is easiest. I have a blog. It's called enlightenedconflict.com. It's I've been writing there for 10 years or so. And it's a combination of business, thoughts about life, just things I'm thinking about. They're kind of random things. Um, and if anybody ever wants to just listen to me babble about different ideas, that's probably the best place. Twitter, I'm a little bit more, I engage on more specific things. And I hate LinkedIn, but I'm on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you for being here on
All
the club with us today. We really appreciate it.
right. Thanks, Marshall. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone, for your time joining us today for this conversation with Bruce McTague. I'm Marshall Kirkpatrick, your host of the Sprinklr Coffee Club. I hope you'll join us next time, and I hope you found this as inspiring as I did. Take care.